All right, so welcome to the 7 Minutes to Better Selling podcast. As Jim may have mentioned, I'm your host, Colin Lake. I'm also the president and founder of Development and Next Leaders. So from a logistics perspective, for those who are joining us today, the title says 7 Minutes to Better Selling, but the live conversations will range anywhere from 7 to 12 minutes. And then once completed, we will edit the highlights from the program down to 7 minutes for future listening and ability to pull the content out as quickly as possible. So we're real excited to have Jim join us. Jim is the Chief Distribution Officer for Lifetime Financial, which is an extraordinarily successful financial advisory. He's here to kick off a great discussion on sales. So Jim, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, Colin.
Thanks, Jim. So to get the conversation started, the sales industry, and in particular the financial sales industry, is under a bit of pressure. So financial advisors are being asked to reduce how much they pay for their valuable services. Financial sales reps for investment firms, called wholesalers, are being valued less and less. And one of the reasons this is happening is, the information a salesperson brings, many of the clients or prospective clients feel like it's easily accessible. In other words, like what the salesperson's bringing to the table doesn't have as much value. And so Development and Next Leaders is busy researching and learning and coaching on different ways to help sales folks get back to doing what they've always done best, which is solving the problems for the most important people, which is their clients. And so that's why, again, I'm so excited to have you here to lead this discussion. So with all that in mind, Jim, I'm going to ask you a two-part question. For question number one is, how do you get into the industry, and what's driven your success to this amazing role you find yourself in now?
Colin, it's so interesting you say that, because I think in every job there is some sort of sales, right? If you're an analyst or you're an engineer or a CPA, you're saying, well, this is why I think we should do this as an engineer or as a CPA. You're saying, oh, here's your tax, here's why you have to pay so much, or here's why we're taking the deductions. So there's always some sort of sales involved. The difference is that we're in a sales profession that is 100% dependent on our income. And I remember our father, my dad, Jim Lake, used to say, if a good salesperson will always be able to support his family, right? Or his or her family.
Great point.
Right. And I thought about that. And when I was in college, Colin, I was a business major, right? And about halfway through, somebody said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'm most likely going to get into sales some way, shape, or form. And they said, well, what are you doing as a business major? And I'm like, well, I thought that's what you do. And they said, you'd probably be better off in communications, because that's what I think is the bottom line of sales. It's communication, right? It's what you talked about earlier, Colin. It's not about information anymore. Because the information we can look up on our phone right now and we can look at, but understanding that information is much different, especially in financial services. So it's not necessarily the information, it's the understanding, application of that information, and it's the language that it takes in order to sink in. That's the difference. That's what takes what we would consider a sales pitch to really understanding what it means to me, how it applies to my life. And that's how I got into this business. And Colin, I was watching something. I'm always doing thing. I use a phrase called sharpen iron with iron, right? Get smart.
Love it.
All the time. And there was something on Michael Phelps. And Michael Phelps said, people are like, well, how did you become so successful? And he said, hard work and passion. And right, everybody's looking for that silver bullet, like that amazing, oh my gosh, what is this thing that I can do in order to go from 0 to 10 million followers overnight? And Michael Phelps said it. It's 20 years of hard work got me to this point. And I loved what I did. I got into this business originally, Colin, because I thought I could make really good money. And I did. I did really well very quickly.
Great thoughts, Jim, across the board. I love it. And then like you give that quote from Michael Phelps, which perfectly answers the question, like how you got into the industry and how you've gotten to this point to where you are in your career, which is of course a wonderful, wonderful part of your career. So let me ask you this. And by the way, you touched on it throughout that last question, but what do you think the biggest challenge facing salespeople today?
And Colin, I'll go back to the phone and the information. As you know, my son was in the hospital recently. And what happens is you go on the internet and you look up WebMD, and based on the symptoms that you see or hear or have somebody explain to you, you look on the internet and you have it all figured out, right? You are a doctor because you have all this information, and then you walk in and you're like, whoa, I was so far off. And what happens is that the reason that the challenge is there, the information is good, but understanding that information is night and day. And if you're not in the financial services business and you don't do this 24/7, 365, then you're going to take that information and most likely use it the wrong way. And the reason that financial sales is so important is that since 2008, after the big crisis, we have hundreds of thousands of less financial advisors than we did then. But we have millions and millions of more people that need that help and advice. So think about that. More people that need that help and advice, but less people to help them apply it to their lives. We have to take this information and help people apply it to their lives.
So Jim, with that math there, like more people retiring, fewer people there to solve the problem, why are financial sales being put under pressure or being asked to charge less or whatever else? Like why?
Go down the mountain. It's like Everest, right? The Sherpa takes you up the mountain, but the Sherpa's job's not finished at the top. He or she's going to take you down the mountain. It's a little easier, but you still have to make sure you have that protection in place and those guarantees in place. And what I'm noticing is a lot of people are getting to retirement and they're then realizing that they didn't plan properly because they thought they could do it okay. And it just goes to that one study I see year in and year out from Dalbar that says over the last 20 years, the S&P 500's average approximately, we'll say 9.5 to 10%. But the average investor has returned 3.8%. So the market made this and we made this because the person that sees that information, they do the wrong thing at the wrong time. Why, Colin? And I think, the more information, my coach says to me, dollars follow value. Remember that. Dollars follow value. The more value you bring, the more people are going to pay for your advice. You might be able to do okay, amateur, right? Delving into it every once in a while. But I know for a fact I can create an optimal plan by making sure you have guaranteed income for life based on your basic expenses. And that's what Merton comes to the conclusion is we can put an optimal plan together for you. But the difference is you have to apply it to your life and stick with it. That's the difference. That's what a financial advisor,
Excellent.
A planner, a good wholesaler for the individual.
Excellent. Okay, Jim, we're going to wrap up with this last question. And you've been an excellent guest. And for all those people who are prayers out there, please do keep Jim's son in mind. He's getting better, but in the hospital currently. So keep praying if you are a prayerful person. We'd all appreciate the prayers.
Thank
all right.
you.
So last thought, Jim, is what drives successful sales in the financial services industry or just sales in general in the foreseeable future? Maybe like a minute to wrap up with that answer.
Well, it's funny when people ask me how do you sum it up? It's like Michael Phelps talking about hard work and passion. I always talk about it is activity and message. Activity is the key. It's like losing weight, right? You can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. It's 80% diet, 20% exercise. Exercise is important. I exercise almost every single day of the year. But the good diet is the key. In our business of sales, it is activity 80% of your successful sales career will be activity, high activity, just what Michael Phelps talked about, hard work. And then developing that good message and that communication and making sure you're constantly in touch with your clients more than anybody else that is going to talk to them in any other profession. And that's what the difference between a good advisor and a great advisor is.
Wonderful, Jim. That was really, really good. And this is going to be on tape, so we won't edit that part out because that is some big power statements in there. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us for the 7 Minutes of Better Selling podcast. As I mentioned at the onset, we will have these calls will last anywhere between 7 and 12 minutes. We will edit the highlights out, and there was plenty of them here from Chief Distribution Officer Jim Lake. And so, Jim, thanks again for joining us. And maybe I'll just wrap up with this one thought. If you take your activity and keep it high, you keep your message focused on exactly how it positively impacts the challenges your clients are faced with, that may be one of the solutions to helping us be better salespeople going forward. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and thanks, everyone, for the great comments throughout the conversation.